Hey everybody, Kurt Schneider here. We are in Canada this morning, in Digby, Nova Scotia, which is the scallop capital of the world, and they're also known for lobstering. We're going to visit a museum here that is the Right Admiral Robert Digby Museum. He is a historically significant person in the early days of Nova Scotia, in fact of Canada. So we're going to be checking that out. Digby, Nova Scotia is across the bay from Newfoundland. We took a ferry to get here from St. John, Newfoundland, and that was about 2.5 hours. Otherwise, it would be about a day's drive to get to the area where Newfoundland and Nova Scotia connect. And it's practically an island here, but it does have a connection to the land. We are going to go down Main Street a little bit. The museum is down the street about a quarter mile. Hey guys, I'm here with Andrew Jeffrey. He's one of the volunteers at the Admiral Digby Museum, and he's going to show us a few things.
So, welcome to the museum. I'll start with the history of the museum itself, because that can often be fascinating alone. So, the house was built in 1840 for the Woodrow and Dakin families. And people lived here for about 100 years, but in the by the mid-20th century, it had been vacant. So the town purchased the house for use as the library. And while the library was here, they took the time, like people would donate antiques and other just knickknacks and artifacts from their homes, like for display purposes. And when the library outgrew the house, those original displays became the core of the original museum collection. Things continued on until in 1996 we built an annex. So down the hall here, we'll show you later, there's a much more modern section of the building, and that was built to house the genealogy department. Well, this is the parlor. So back in the day, like 100 years ago plus, the front-facing rooms of the house would be where you'd be entertaining people and spending spare time. This is where a lot of like the fancy stuff would be, like for instance the grandfather clock you just saw. You'd occasionally have the good china on display, family portraits, and also things used to entertain guests, like for instance the pump organ here and the melodica. And don't be fooled by the pipes on the pump organ. Those are fake. They're only there for show.
That's neat.
The actual sound is made using pumping the bellows with your feet at the bottom here. And melodica does the same thing, only smaller. And yes, both of those work. We just simply ask that people don't play them because we don't want to break them.
Right, the melodica has a different sound than the organ, I guess.
It has a different sound.
Is it kind of higher?
A bit higher pitched, not quite as full. The thing about organs is that you can make an organ, like any organ, sound like a whole orchestra, the big pipe organs especially, but you can't make an orchestra sound like an organ.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the marine room. Digby being a fishing town, we obviously have a deep connection to the sea. Our main claim to fame is the scallop fleet and Digby scallops. If you've ever had them, trust me, they're delicious. Not like the fake ones you often get in the stores, like actual proper scallops. They're usually they can be like usually around that big around in restaurants, but they can get bigger. They essentially just drag it across the bottom, and when it starts putting up enough certain amount of resistance, and the crew will know by how the boat's behaving, they haul it up, and there's usually a second bar down here which they attach a line to and empty the bags, wire bags, onto the tray. And from this tray they'll sort the scallops out from everything else, and they'd chuck the scallops and chuck the rest of the stuff overboard. What they would often do back in the day is a bunch of boys would get in their dinghies or dories with their parents or otherwise, and they would take these boats with them, and they'd be out in the channel between the Annapolis Basin and the Bay of Fundy, so it's the Digby Gut, and they would put these in the water, they'd have the sails and rudder set, and they'd actually race them.
That sounds like a great time.
Oh, it sounds like an awesome time. The Princess Helena was actually the ferry from Digby to St. John back in the mid-20th century. It was retired in the early 60s. For much of human history, things were more or less made by hand, using hand tools. That didn't really start changing until the mid-1800s. But even after that, like stuff like quilts you'd often see people making them by hand. And like look at the stitching on this crazy quilt. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. Can you imagine the amount of time that would have taken to put all this together?
And names of your children or friends. That looks
Or
like
places.
1914.
Yeah, not sure what that would be. But here's Westport is the village on Briar Island. Well, the more interesting bit is the bed key. Because back in the day, before they had springs, or if you wanted something other than a big slab of wood underneath your mattress, what you do is that you'd have ropes crisscrossing along, and well, ropes stretch over time, or if you got married, for instance, more weight on the bed than you had before, you'd have to tighten the ropes to maintain the level of softness you wanted. Possible origin for the phrase tying the knot is when people get married. Like, you're more than one person in the bed, you have to tighten things up a bit, and in order for the ropes to stay tight, you'd obviously have to tie a knot. So Maud Lewis was a folk artist who lived in Marshalltown, just on the other side of the highway from Digby. She was physically disabled lady who spent a lot of time painting, and she became quite prolific and did commission work as well as stuff for fun in the area. She died, I think, somewhere in the late 60s or early 70s. Her husband died around the same time. And what ended up happening was the house fell into a bit of state of disrepair, and eventually the museum here and a couple of other organizations worked together and arranged to have the house picked up and moved to Halifax. And there at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, they painstakingly restored the place, and the whole house is on display because Maud had actually painted it like it was one of her canvases.
That sounds beautiful.
I drove about 6 kilometers west of town to find Maud's homestead.
This is the replica of Maud Lewis's tiny house. It's on her and Everett's piece of property. The original is in a museum in Halifax. I understand she used turpentine and basically oil-based house paint. So I saw a video that said it was quite a bit of fumes in there. I guess it's dissipated now. Maud was tiny, so that must be her bed. And she did actually paint her whimsical designs. And so this must be quite a bit like it was. And only needing one stove to heat up this whole little house.
Digby itself was established by Loyalist settlers. The area was originally known as Conway, named after a British officer. There's about 500 settlers here initially, and after the War of Independence, Admiral Robert Digby was one of the British officials who negotiated with the new American government for the safe passage of Loyalist settlers out of the now United States to safer places to live. Digby's group numbered about 1,500, and they settled here, and add that to the initial 500, that's about 2,000 people, and that's been the population of the town, give or take, ever since. So this painting here was made to commemorate the arrival of Digby and the settlers here. The vessel shown front and center is the Atalanta, that being Admiral Digby's flagship. And if you look just to the right of the Atalanta along the shoreline, that's roughly where the ferry terminal of St. John is now.
I can see that.
And Digby itself, like the town, is hidden behind the bluff. And if you look in the far distance off to the just off to the left, nowadays you probably see a bit of Cornwallis or Smith's Cove.